The world awoke to a seismic shift in the Russia-Ukraine war, as headlines blared across every screen and anxious faces gathered around televisions from Washington to Warsaw. Under the cover of darkness, the United States unleashed a sudden and powerful barrage of Tomahawk cruise missiles, their engines roaring as they streaked across the night sky, striking deep into key Russian military installations in occupied Ukraine. These were not random targets. Each missile was aimed with precision at command centers, ammunition depots, and the vital supply lines that had been fueling Russia's grinding advance for months. The explosions lit up the night, turning the darkness into a battlefield of fire and thunder, signaling a dramatic new phase of American involvement, direct intervention on the ground. President Donald Trump, in a rare and urgent late-night Oval Office address, confirmed the strike. He called it a necessary and measured response to Russia's unrelenting aggression, stating that America could not ignore the mounting threat any longer. He declared that America would no longer stand by as Russia tried to redraw Europe's map by force, vowing to defend the principles of sovereignty and freedom. The message was unmistakable: the old rules were over, and the US was now a direct combatant in the conflict, ready to shape the outcome. On the battlefield, chaos erupted among Russian forces. Their logistics were crippled, command structures thrown into disarray, and soldiers left scrambling for answers in the aftermath of the sudden assault. For Ukraine, it was a moment of relief and hope, a strategic opening at last, and a sign that the world had not forgotten their struggle. The world now wondered, had Trump handed Ukraine a decisive advantage, or had he pushed us all closer to a catastrophic, uncontrollable war? The Tomahawk strike marked the most significant Western escalation since the war began, sending shockwaves through Moscow, Beijing, and every European capital as leaders scrambled to assess the new reality. As the smoke cleared over battered cities and anxious civilians watched the horizon, the future of Ukraine and the fragile balance of global stability hung in the balance, awaiting Russia's next move and the world's response. Before the American strike, Ukraine's war was locked in a brutal stalemate, with neither side able to gain a decisive advantage for months on end. The front lines barely shifted, and every day brought new hardships for the soldiers entrenched in the mud and cold. The fighting echoed the trench warfare of a century ago, with both armies dug in, separated by a no-man's land scarred by shell craters and barbed wire. Russian forces in the Donbas advanced slowly, relying heavily on relentless artillery barrages and swarms of drones to grind down Ukrainian defenses, leaving entire towns in ruins and forcing civilians to flee their homes. Near Kharkiv, Russian troops tried to carve out a buffer zone, trading lives for scorched earth, burning villages and fields to deny resources to the defenders. Despite immense pressure and constant bombardment, Ukrainian troops held firm. They worked tirelessly to fortify their trenches, braving the elements and exhaustion, and launched daring strikes deep into Russian-held territory, sometimes under the cover of darkness. The cost was staggering. Tens of thousands dead, families torn apart, and cities under constant threat from Russian missiles and drones. Every day new casualties were reported, and the toll on civilians was heartbreaking, yet Ukraine's spirit remained unbroken. The nation was unified in its fight for survival, with civilians volunteering, supporting the troops, and refusing to give in to despair. The world watched, numbed by daily reports of destruction and loss, as images of ruined cities and desperate refugees filled television screens across the globe. Then everything changed. The Tomahawk strike shattered the deadlock, sending shockwaves through both armies and signaling a new phase in the conflict. For Ukrainian soldiers, news of direct U.S. intervention was a massive morale boost. It brought hope where there had been only exhaustion and uncertainty. Russian supply lines were crippled, easing pressure on the front and giving Ukrainian forces a much-needed opportunity to regroup and push forward. Suddenly, a Ukrainian counteroffensive seemed possible. The balance of power had shifted, and commanders began to plan bold new operations. The strike did more than destroy targets. It injected hope and momentum into Ukraine's defense, inspiring soldiers and civilians alike to believe in victory once more. The war's rhythm had changed overnight. A new day had begun on Ukraine's front lines, filled with uncertainty but also with renewed determination and the promise of change. President Trump's Tomahawk strike was a high-stakes gamble, taken after failed diplomacy and warnings of a new Russian offensive. He framed it as a limited action to demilitarize Russian forces in Ukraine, not a declaration of war. The Kremlin responded with fury, suspending diplomatic contact and raising its nuclear alert. The world watched as the risk of US-Russia confrontations soared. Domestically, reactions split. Supporters hailed the strike as strength. Critics called it reckless and dangerous. The debate raged across Congress and the media, reflecting a nation divided over this perilous new direction. Global markets reeled. Oil prices surged. Stocks tumbled. European allies, while publicly supportive, were privately anxious about escalation. The strike changed the military reality in Ukraine, but unleashed political and economic instability worldwide. The stakes had never been higher. The Tomahawk strike deepened America's divisions over the war. Polls showed most Americans lacked confidence in President Trump's handling of the conflict. The strike turned skepticism into fear for some and vindication for others. Supporters saw it as proof of resolve against Russia. Critics called it a reckless overcorrection. The partisan divide sharpened. Many Democrats and some Republicans feared uncontrollable escalation, while Trump's base saw overdue leadership. The prospect of direct war with Russia now felt real and immediate. Families across the country worried about the future, security, the economy, and their children. The strike didn't just hit Ukraine, it struck at the heart of America's debate about its role in the world. The nation was forced to confront the price of global leadership. The conversation had never been more urgent. As Tomahawk missiles launched, President Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff, was en route to Moscow for peace talks. The strike instantly torpedoed diplomacy. The Kremlin canceled the visit and declared talks impossible while bombs fell. Witkoff was rerouted to Brussels to consult with anxious NATO allies. The administration's carrot-and-stick approach had become all stick. Critics argued diplomacy was abandoned for force. Russia's response was hostile, warning of asymmetrical and painful retaliation. Communication channels between Washington and Moscow were severed, raising the risk of miscalculation. U.S. diplomats now scrambled to reassure allies and prevent the crisis from spiraling further. The path to peace was obscured by the smoke of the Tomahawk strikes. After the Tomahawk strike, the threat of escalation became terrifyingly real. President Trump had already deployed nuclear submarines to the region. Russia put its own arsenal on high alert. The world watched a tense standoff between nuclear powers, where a single misstep could be catastrophic. The U.S. doubled down, moving bombers to Europe and signaling the strike was part of a broader strategy. Trump threatened crippling tariffs on Russian goods, aiming to pressure Moscow on two fronts: military and economic. The administration bet that combined pressure would force Russia to de-escalate. But this strategy risked backing Russia into a corner, making its next move unpredictable. By directly targeting Russian forces, the U.S. crossed a line previous administrations avoided. The goal: force a resolution on American terms. But the risks were immense. The war had become a direct U.S.-Russia confrontation. The world held its breath, hoping leaders would step back from the brink. Amid military escalation, international support for Ukraine remained vital. The imminent delivery of a US-made Patriot missile system, funded by European allies, was crucial for defending Ukrainian cities from Russian retaliation. The Patriot's arrival symbolized Western resolve and boosted Ukrainian morale. The US strike galvanized allies to increase their own support, recognizing the stakes for Europe. Economic partnerships also deepened. A new US-Ukraine minerals deal aimed to secure resources for reconstruction and recovery. This support provided Ukraine with both a shield and a foundation for the future. The Tomahawk strike changed the tactical situation, but ongoing international aid gave Ukraine the strategic depth to endure. Ukraine did not stand alone. Amid the violence, a small but vital humanitarian breakthrough occurred. A prisoner exchange negotiated in Istanbul. The agreement, overshadowed by the Tomahawk strike, offered a rare glimmer of hope. For families, it meant the safe return of loved ones, a reminder of the war's human cost. Such exchanges don't change the strategic reality, but they build slivers of trust and keep dialogue alive. In a war where large-scale peace talks fail, these small wins matter. They show that even in darkness, cooperation is possible. With US-Russia diplomacy severed, back channels like these may be the only way to de-escalate. The prisoner exchange was a poignant reminder. Beneath the headlines, "The war is about people." Small acts of compassion stand in stark contrast to the conflict's destruction. As the world braces for Russia's response, these fragile victories for humanity matter more than ever. The Tomahawk strike was not just about Ukraine. It was a move on the global chessboard, signaling a dramatic shift in how power is projected and alliances are tested. This was a calculated demonstration, meant to send ripples far beyond the immediate battlefield. U.S. Envoy Steve Witkoff's dual role, managing both the Ukraine and Middle East crises, reflected the administration's view of a single, interconnected geopolitical struggle. Every decision in one region now reverberates in another, highlighting the complexity of today's international landscape. The strike altered dynamics worldwide, forcing nations to reassess American intentions and complicating diplomacy elsewhere. Allies and adversaries alike scrambled to interpret Washington's next move as uncertainty spread through diplomatic circles. The world became more volatile and uncertain. Protests erupted, markets fluctuated wildly, and ordinary people everywhere felt the tremors of decisions made far away. The war in Ukraine became a test of America's global standing, with public opinion shaping the administration's options. Lawmakers faced mounting pressure as citizens voiced both support and skepticism, making every policy choice a balancing act. Before the strike, few Americans saw the war as a major threat. Now, the nation was forced to confront its implications. Conversation shifted from distant headlines to urgent debates at kitchen tables and town halls across the country. Trump's strike was a bid to reshape the global order, a rejection of post-Cold War consensus and a signal of more assertive U.S. policy. It was a message to both friends and foes that the old rules no longer apply, and that American leadership would now be defined by action, not just words. The message was clear. American patience has limits, and its military power will be used when deemed necessary. This was a warning, a line drawn in the sand for the world to see. Whether this move deters aggression or sparks wider conflict is the question that now confronts us all. The world holds its breath, waiting to see if this bold action will restore order or unleash new chaos. The game has changed, and the rules are being rewritten in real time. Every headline, every move on the map now carries greater weight and consequence. The world watches, uncertain of what comes next. Leaders, citizens, and markets alike are on edge, bracing for the next chapter in this unfolding drama. The stakes could not be higher. In this new era, every decision shapes the future, and the world order hangs in the balance.